Right. We're talking about a very difficult subject, but a very necessary and important subject. And in a way, this is going to be the main subject that the Mashiach is going to bring everybody in the world to be occupied in all the time. The Maimonides says that one of the accomplishments of Mashiach is that the whole world will only be interested in knowing God. And the way God is how do you say, perceived now is that's sort of a very limited, small, boring way of life. We're thinking about God all the time. What's there to think about? So the Rebbe is trying to get us to understand two things. Number one, how incredibly impossibly to understand real God is, to the degree that there's nothing really in existence except for God. That God is creating me and he's creating you. And all of the details in the world are very, very important to God, but that doesn't in no way make God less important. What do all the religions say? That God is so important and he's so real and powerful, or whatever he is, that he can't be involved in the world. He can't be involved in the world. That's lowering God down. That's making God, how do you say, user friendly. You don't want that. God has to be way, 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 way up there, and only certain rare people can have any glimpse or idea what God is. Well, the Rebbe says exactly the opposite. That God is infinitely close to us on one hand, and on the other hand, God is infinitely greater than all the other religions can possibly imagine. And one of the aspects of God's greatness is that he's not limited to being out of the world. He's not limited to being spiritual or above the spiritual or whatever. Indeed, God creates everything, and he's creating everything right now. He's creating me and you right now. Oh, so if so, it means that God is infinitely that he say, distant from our perception. He's so real, it's infinitely far away from our perception. It's like taking a poor person off the street, some bum or something like that, and saying, here, we're giving you $100 trillion. You be the king of the world. What are you talking about? He doesn't know what to do. What is he going to do? Go in and buy like a 500,000 bottles of vodka or something like that, and drink a half one, and then he just doesn't get the. By us also, God is creating us. God is also creating the angels. All the other religions in the world that people are going berserk and they're all praying out, basically they're only worshiping angels or spiritual levels or whatever, which is pretty amazing. The angels are pretty impressive. But that's not so. The Rebbe is trying to get into our heads somehow or other how infinitely great God is and how infinitely close God is at the same time. And even God is so close that he not only creates us constantly, and he creates every detail and creates every bug and every molecule and every this, but he cares about all of his creations. God actually cares about all of his creations. Okay, so what do we explain up to now? We explain, I'm trying to figure out some sort of a maybe a better example to get us into this, but that's the idea of Jewish prayer. That's why it says that in the Mishnah in Brachot says that the early Hasidim, they used to take an hour before prayer, they would meditate into godliness, and an hour in prayer, and then they would have an hour after prayer. And so they would think about the greatness of God, the goodness of God, the beauty of God, the wonder of God, how God is in the world, how he creates the world, how he's above the world, how he's above the angels, God's essence. What does this mean? Okay, that's called the ladder. The ladder of prayer. That's the ladder, Jacob's ladder of prayer. Okay, so we're still left with the question: if God is so great and he's so everywhere and he's so ubiquitous and he's so close to us, why don't we feel it? So the Rebbe said, okay, there's two processes by which God hides himself, and that's how he makes the world. God purposely conceals himself in order to make man so that we, man, have the same feeling that God does, namely that there's nothing before me and that I'm God. Right? People feel that's it. I'm the beginning. Everything starts with me, and I call the shots. And whatever I feel, that's right. That's the same thing that God feels. That's another meaning. God created us in His image. But how does God do this? So there's two ways that God, so to speak, conceals over His reality. One way is called tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is how God conceals Himself from the spiritual worlds. And then there's what's called parsa, veils. And that's how He conceals Himself from one spiritual world to the spiritual world below it. So here we go. This, well, tomorrow, anyway, let's go. Hine, behold, tzimtzum. 1 second, where's the chat? What is this? 1 second. What's this? What is this? Shalom, you are new to me. I already spoke with Rabbi Bolton. Okay, I don't know. Let's go. Let's go. We'll try to explain these messages later. Here we go. All right. Here is the idea of the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum, how God contracted His light, hid His light in order to create the spiritual worlds. Okay. Now, in these spiritual worlds, there are basically 4 levels of spiritual worlds. And the top level is not really spiritual. It's more, we call godly. That's the world of what's called the Atzilut. It's not a world, it's a dimension. We are within these dimensions. We are within this, we just don't grasp them. Okay, so this tzimtzum, the Rebbe likened this aspect of Atzilut before. He said, like a person, let's say, has a body, right? The soul has, let's say a better example, a soul has powers, intellect, emotions. And the intellect and emotion, that's the garments of the soul. And it's not the soul itself. That's something like the world of Atzilut. Here we're talking about the microcosm and the macrocosm. Man is made in the image of God. So man has the essence of the soul, just like there's the essence of God. Then man has his intellect and emotions. That's like the world of Atzilut to God. And then man has thought, speech, and action. That's like the lower 3 dimensions, which are called Bria. Below that, Yetzira, and below that is Asiya. And the bottom part of Asiya, that's me and you and us. Okay, so the Rebbe is trying to get us to feel the oneness of God. A little bit. This is a life process. It's not. Ideally, what happens when you feel the oneness of God? What happens when, if you're happy, you feel the oneness of God? You feel that God is creating me exactly the way I am. He wants me the way I am, but He wants me to change myself, improve myself, to appreciate Him more. But when everybody feels God, people will be able to work and have families and have children. They just won't want to get addicted anymore, and there won't be any. The world can get along very well without addictions, and people will be happy, they'll be empowered, they'll be dynamic, because that's the type of world God wants. The people will be who they are. Everyone is special. Yeah. Hine, behold, tzimtzum haya ba'or ein sof. This contraction of God, this concealment, was in the light of God. Hainu sha'or, that the light, nichlal, is included b'me'or, in its source. Ki lefi she'eno olamot, because the worlds are not yochalim, able lekabel. Wait, this thing is, 1 second. Oh, I got this thing over here. 1 second. 1 second. Okay. Ki lefi, because, see, somebody convinced me to make my picture bigger here, so I want to, no, let's not, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do, this is what I want to do. I'll move it over here. There we go. Oh, ki lefi, because Because she'ena olamot yochalim, because lefi she'ena olamot, the worlds are not able lekabel, to receive gilui or and so revealed godliness kamoshu batzmuto, as it is in God's essence. It's like turning the lights on in the movie theater. The picture on the screen is just made from light. You get too much light, so it goes away. The same thing with the world. The world is made from godliness. Too much godliness, no more world. So the world, yochalim, you betelim b'mesiut, the worlds would be negated totally, right? Like the picture on the screen, if you turn out too much light. Same thing, the worlds would be negated, and God doesn't want that. He wants there to be a world. He wants it to be me and you and classes in the morning and etc. Lokach, therefore, tzimtzum, or therefore God, what do you call the contracted, so to speak, he removed this light of God, sheyuchlal, that will be included in the source. Liot rak b'koach v'lo b'poal, that it will be only potential and not actual. This is what we said before, that in the beginning of creation there was God and his name. V'yit alembo, and this will be concealed in God. Shelo yeh gilui, or there won't be any light at all. Rak ha'ma'or, only the source. So in other words, God always exists. God is always everywhere. There's nothing except for God. But God's power of light, God's name, can be, how do you say, withheld by God. God withheld. But God itself, the eliminator, that's Ein Sof, that's what's called the infinite one himself. Lo shayach tzimtzum, it can never be contracted or removed, chas v'shalom, God forbid. Below helam, and it can never be concealed. Exactly the opposite. Ha'ma'or, God himself, who be itgalut, is always revealed, is always everywhere. Lochein, therefore, afilu tinokos, therefore even children know this. Little children know that there is God. I don't know how it is with non-Jewish children. I mean, I'm not just simply not that familiar, but little Jewish children for sure. You take these children and put them in school, they know that there's God, and they do things for God 100%. And it's not because they've been trained particularly, because of their teacher. I mean, there certainly is that element. There's that element in everything, right? You get these Freudian guys and everything, and they minimize and reduce all genuine things to be nothing, right? There's no such thing as love. There's no such thing as courage. There's no such thing. Everything is just the Oedipus complex and all these other, social pressures or whatever you call it. But that's not true. That's a big lie, a terrible lie. There is genuineness. There is genuine love, and there's genuine courage, and these things are genuine, right? The same thing is, there's a genuine faith that every Jew has, possibly everybody in the world. Everybody in the world, I think, has a genuine suspicion that God exists. A suspicion that God exists. And when they see people that actually do believe this, then they realize that not only is it true, but this God is creating them. God is infinitely close to them, just like he's close to me. But the Jews, they have what's called a second soul. And this second soul, it's like an appreciation of God that others don't have. That's what makes a Jew a Jew. What can we do? That's how Abraham was different from everybody else. He had an appreciation for God that was so deep that he was willing to sacrifice his whole life and sacrifice going to heaven and sacrifice everything for the sake of, we'll talk about that today. Okay. Even though the children don't have any grasping understanding of what God is, they can't explain it, how it is that God is creating everything and that God is holy and that God wants us to do the commandments. Because the light of God is not revealed, the details. Nevertheless, the illuminator, in other words, God himself, God is found below like above. By God, there is no below and above. All there is God. And children feel that. And therefore, children, a lot of times you get these old ladies, simple people, only simple people. They can explain. And that's as the Baal Shem Tov came to make everybody simple, to make the simple people into scholars, Torah scholars, and to make the Torah scholars into simple people. That everybody should have both. And therefore, Nikra Tzimtzum, why do you have to be simple? Because you can't understand that God is creating your understanding. Right? Understanding by its nature has to grasp things. When you say, I don't understand something, it means I don't grasp it, right? There's certain ideas that are just They're not in my mind. I don't understand, right? You have to go to school. You have to learn, what is the theory of relativity? What does it mean, the circulatory system? What does it mean, art, beauty? I don't understand these things, right? But there's nevertheless here, you take an example, there's people that appreciate. You can appreciate beautiful music. They don't know why. They don't know why. They just appreciate it. The same thing is it's possible for us to appreciate the fact that God's oneness, but even though we don't understand it, says the Rebbe, even though the God removes the potential for understanding, but nevertheless he reveals, always, constantly is revealed this essence of God, which is impossible to understand. It's not even the category of understanding. So therefore, in order for God to create the world, he has to, so to speak, remove totally his light, his creative force, and then afterwards he shoots a new beam of creative force. That beam of creative force, that's called God's word. Okay, but first of all, there has to be this removal. Tzimtzum, like a speaker, before he speaks, he clears his throat, but he settles himself down. Tzimtzum, zeh makom pone, it's called, in Kabbalah, it's called tzimtzum, contraction, or it's called makom panoi, an empty place, or a halal, or want to call it a vacuum. What does it mean? She'ein halal v'reik, it's not empty. In other words, reality doesn't go away. Reality exists, but it doesn't have any details. There's no spirituality. There's no light of God. Calls ela nishar bebechinas meor, but there is the essence of God always. Just like we say, for instance, a person's soul. Shebabo laguf, when it comes into the body, near a gila, you can feel it of life, which is in the body. But kodembo, but the soul, before it comes into the body, even though she yesh bo koach, that it has the power and it has life to enliven the body, these tabshuzba that's enclosed in it, nevertheless, this life force of the soul is bekoach, its potential and not actual. Calls a man all the time, as long as it's not in the body. Okay, so the Rebbe is going in this metaphor between the human being who's made in the image of God and God himself. From King David said, from my flesh I can grasp God. What does it mean? Certain aspects, right? God, if you look up in the sky or something, you can't see a big eyeball or something, but it says that God sees. You look up, you can't see a big tongue, right? But it says that God speaks. So what does exactly it mean? It says that God is wise, that God is kind, that God is severe. These are all aspects of God. These are all aspects of God. What is God himself? Listen, we don't understand these aspects, but the God himself is impossible. It's not in the category of understanding. Not in the category of understanding. Like the Alter Rebbe says before, it's like trying to grab ideas of mathematics with your hands. Your hands aren't the proper tool to grab mathematics. Same thing, your mind is not the proper tool to grasp God. What is the tool to grasp God? It says the heart. Simplicity. It says simplicity, simple faith. Of course, simple faith can also be dangerous, right? Simple faith can also be, hey kid, want to buy a candy, calling from the shadows or something. You believe everybody. So that's not, pure faith is good to connect to God, but there has to be details. That's why the Torah is here. Torah to tell you how to, to express this faith. Okay, so it says, but now we're talking about God himself. Just like a person has a soul. Remember, think for 1 second. Think for 1 second. Where were you before you were born? Huh? Can you think about it? Can you remember what's going on? I mean, were there? Something was there. Something was there. Where were you? So, okay, I was unconscious. But there was an I, right? Yes, but I was unconscious. So how do you know there was an I? It must have been. I mean, here I am, and there was something there. So here I. This is that aspect of your soul, which can be unconscious. It has obviously, if it's not conscious, it has no emotions or love or fear or anything. That's something like. Let's take now go back to the example. We're trying to talk from man to God. That's something like God before he began to create the world. there was pure godliness, right? Now, when the child is born and he has consciousness, that doesn't take away his soul. Soul is still there. You're just not aware of it. You, in a way, you can't be aware of it. It's just too real and too high. That's the real you. This is the same thing with God. God is everywhere, the whole entire universe, spiritual and physical. That's within, if you want to call it God. And God is the reality that lends reality to all these other worlds. It says, but before the soul comes into the body, even though that it has power and life to enliven the body, but nevertheless, this life is all potential and it's not actual. All the time it doesn't come into the body. When it comes into the body, then it comes to be revealed. This life force becomes revealed from potential to be actual, from concealed and to be revealed. And also a person that's wise. Take an example, a person that is wise. That in his wisdom, one second, my wife is calling. My wife is beckoning. 1 minute here. All right, so we're talking about God and we're trying to somehow or other get a feeling of how close God is to us. So he says, when it's like the soul, before it comes into the body, then it's not revealed at all. Same thing is with God. God, before he, so to speak, starts creating the spiritual worlds, and then after that, the physical worlds, as God is not revealed at all, which is poor. Just like the soul, it has the power of seeing, the power of hearing, but none of these things are revealed. Or even more, you can close your eyes. A person that says, I am raw, the eye cannot see, until a person opens up his eye. Also the power of walking in your feet, and etc., and all the powers, until you start to use them, to manifest them, it seems that they aren't there at all. One minute. Similarly, we can understand by God how God, so to speak, removed his light. That the light of God was contracted, and concealed. Liot rak, to be only ma'or, all there is just God himself, the essence of God, and none of God's aspects are revealed. That's called an empty place, v'chalal l'gabi or, in regarding to the light, that it shouldn't be there revealed. Okay. So here we are, me and you, and we're here, and we're being created every instant by God, and we don't feel it. Why? Because God hid himself, right? So here he's saying, you have no idea how much God hid himself. We'll get to the next paragraph, you'll see. That's only the beginning. That's how God hides himself from the spiritual worlds in order to create them, how he dims himself down, so to speak. The spiritual worlds are created by God, but not in a way that God dims himself down. By the God, so to speak, removes totally his light, so to speak, conceals totally his light. Even though in effect there's nothing empty from God. Shahari, because God is the illuminator. He fills all places. God is everywhere. And in the light himself, God can never contract himself. Okay, so it's the same question everybody asks, right? If God creates the world, who creates God? So that's exactly the point. The question comes from our inability to even conceive of the possibility that there's true existence, that there's true existence beyond any possible comprehension, even spiritual. Like I said before, God doesn't really exist. He creates all existence. Existence has already defined something, and God is not defined. God is infinite reality. Beyond the time is just a creation. beyond consciousness. Consciousness is a creation. All these things are just creations of God. Later on, we'll learn that really in this essence of God is the Jews. Okay, but that's going to be later. That's the whole idea of the Jews doing the Torah. That's Abraham. Abraham revealed. That's what Abraham revealed. Abraham revealed that he could actually give God pleasure. Why? And we're not talking about that now, but I'm just throwing this in. Why did God do all this stuff? Why did God have to create a world? What was God doing before he created the world? So the answer was, obviously, there was nothing to do. There was just pure oneness. It's impossible to even talk about, right? This idea of pure oneness, that's the world of Atzilus or something like that, one of these upper worlds. That's spiritual. As soon as you come to any sort of description, you're already getting into the spiritual. And spiritual is just a creation of God. But Abraham revealed that there's a reason why God created the world. And that is so that we should use the world properly, and the world should not use us improperly. That we should improve and change nature, and nature should not destroy us. Even though in truth, there's nothing empty. Okay, yeah, we said this. Nevertheless, but because the Arizal is Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, that he lived like 450 years ago. He compared the Gila, this revelation, and the light of God, which comes from Ein Sof. Well, maybe I can do this 1 second. There we go. Found another way to scroll down. Because the Arizal, he is the ultimate master of the secrets of the Torah, Kabbalah. He lived in Sfat. He's buried in Sfat. People go up to his grave on the 5th day of Menachem of Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. He compared this revelation of God from Ein Sof and the creation of the 10 Sfirot of Atzilut. He called it lights. Why did he call this creative power of God light? Or a light and a ray. It's something like the light of the sun, how it comes from the sun. Therefore, Korah Tzimtzum, he called this, because in the Torah it doesn't call it light, it calls it God's word. And you can call it God's spirit, God's creative force, God's energy, whatever. But the Arizal called it light, and for a lot of different reasons why. There's explained a lot of different reasons, which we don't have to go into now. But one of the reasons is, it's just like there's a source of light and light which comes out of it. And the light, for instance, the sun, a beam of sunlight, when it's in the sun, it's not really a beam anymore. It's infinitely more powerful than it was, but it loses its whole identity, its boundaries. The same thing is the light of God. If it doesn't, so to speak, come out of God, which is impossible. So God conceals himself, so it seems as though his light is separate from us. And therefore, God, he called this idea of the tzimtzum, this first contraction, that which the light of God becomes included, goes back into the source. He calls it makom panoi, an empty place, which this is concealing of the light. And this hiding God's light, this is until it doesn't, it's like the sun, the light, a beam of the sunlight going back into the sun, until it's not called a beam anymore. Therefore, it's not called God's wisdom. It's not even called this level of God's wisdom, which is not a known wisdom. When can we say that God is wise and that God is this? This is after many concealments and descents of light from one level to another. Akudim, Nekudim. These are all sorts of Kabbalistic levels that are hinted at in Jacob. Shebechinas Einayim, that there's what's called the eyes of God. This is the source of the vessels of God, that there can be what's called God's wisdom. But it's not a known wisdom. It's not like our wisdom. There could be a source of the wisdom. Okay, so again, God himself, his essence, is infinitely close to us. Infinitely close to us. Why? Because there's nothing except for God. That's all there is God. But God conceals this closeness. And even more, he conceals all of his spiritual aspects and all of his creative force. He conceals that from us. And the beginning of this concealment was how God hid himself in order to make the spiritual worlds. Beginning with the world of Atzilut, which, like I said before, is not really spiritual, it's godliness revealed. Hainu Sha'az, then there is, when God started to reveal himself, then he revealed the power, hita'avut, of creation. Then there could be the source of wisdom. And etc. Let's just skip this. Okay. But there's another level. That's only the beginning of the concealment. But then when God comes, that's from the essence of God, so to speak, to the world of Atzilut. And there's all these levels in the middle, which are from God's essence to these levels which are in the contraction, before the contraction, this empty place that's called God's crown. And in there's what's called akudim, nakudim. Okay, these are all Kabbalistic things, ideas. Again, the only reason we're discussing this is because you ever think, once I took a course in first aid. So you want to take a course in first aid. So they explain to you a little bit about how the brain works and the lungs work and this system works and the circulatory system works. I mean, you're not a doctor, you're not a surgeon, but you have to know in general that there are such things. Don't think that a person is just like this body and inside there's, a couple of batteries or something. No, you have to know what's going on. The same thing we're talking about here, the anatomy of reality, the anatomy of the world. So don't think that there's just me and there's God, and God is very high. And God is so high up, that's why idolatry comes from. God is so high, we have to pray to a person, or we have to pray to a thing, or an animal, or a level, or a spirit, or a ghost, or whatever it is. They have all these gods. Hinduism has millions of them, who knows them, thousands of levels and things like that to pray to, right? So here the Rebbe is trying to tell us that God, on one hand, is infinitely more distant than anyone can possibly imagine. On the other hand, he's infinitely closer than we can imagine. He's closer to us than we are to ourselves. He's creating us every instant, and he cares about us. So if he's so close, then why is he concealed? So the Rebbe is explaining a little bit of this anatomy of how God conceals himself from the world. It's sort of like trying to explain, nuclear physics to your toe. Your toe is the lowest to your heel or something, so low. So you have to explain, no, listen, your toe is a part of your foot, and the foot is a part of your leg, and the leg is a part of your body. Body is controlled by the brain, and the brain is very concealed, right? The toe has no idea what's going on. But that's where we are. That's our generation. It says we're at the heels of the Moshiach. But that's the tzimtzum. But there's also another thing which is called the parsa. Okay, we haven't got much time. There's another thing which is called the parsa. These veils which are between Atzilut, that's the highest of these four dimensions, and Bria. We said before that Bria and the dimension below it, which is called Yetzira, and the dimension which is below it is called Asiya. That's like a person's thought, speech, and action. That's just garments of the soul. And the person's personality, his intellect, and his emotions, that's like Atzilut. So it says, okay, so these veils, this is something like a rabbi, a teacher, that he wants to explain a very deep idea to his pupil. She'ena Talmid Yochel, and the pupil cannot accept it. So therefore, he has to give him a lot of examples, v'chida, and give him a lot of, parables. And parables, there's a different word for it. Chida, mysteries, there's another word for it, again. Questions. Chida is what do you call it? What do they call it? The parable, the mystery of the Sphinx. Anyway, Chida. Kamo Mishle Shlomo. For instance, like the parables of King Solomon. How do they call it? Mishle in English? It's called parables, isn't it? Isn't that the name of the book? It skipped my mind. Okay, there's Ecclesiastes, and there's no, it's not parables. Something. Okay, I'll think of it later. I don't know why it skipped my mind. Okay, come on, Mishlik Shlomo, like the book of King Solomon, of the parables of King Solomon. Lishomra Meisha Zara. Verses talks about you have to beware from the wicked woman. So King Solomon is telling us to keep away from wicked women. No, he's telling us. I mean, you don't have to have King Solomon to tell you that. This is all a mashal. It is just a parable. Lihi nafshel, the nimshal, to the result, to the point that he's trying to get to, that he's talking about idolatry. Shu zara, egotism, idolatry, which is strange to the words of Torah. The Cain also similar to that. All the things, Kamosha being the mushal, you bring a parable for something, you bring something simple to explain something more deep. Hine, a mushal, this parable is from other things. It's not the idea itself. Right? I remember once there was a movie, there was a movie that Walt Disney made. We talked about this before, about the theory of evolution, explaining no, sorry, my mind is okay, about the theory of relativity, that Einstein's theory of relativity. And Einstein explained it. He has a simple book where he explained basically what it means, relativity. And Walt Disney made a movie out of it. And it was pretty understandable. It was for kids. It was a cartoon. Kids understand that we can understand that everything is relative to everything else. Good. So, okay, now he had an example of a person standing on a plane track, a plane prep, the train platform, and you don't know who's moving. Is the train moving? Is the platform moving? Right? If they have no other point of reference. Good. So what did he do? He brought an example from a train and a platform to understand this deep idea of his theory of relativity, which is basically very difficult to understand by a normal person. But if you look at this movie, at least you understand what direction to go. That's what's called a mashal. So Zewi in Parsa, this is the idea of the veil that's between the world of Atzilut, which we said the world of Atzilut, that's like God's emotions and intellect, and Bria, which is like the world of God's thought. Shehu bechinas masach. It's like a veil which conceals something by means of something else. Shalomi in Atzilus. It's not with talking about Atzilut at all. Right? So, like for instance, it says, you want to understand God, it says, from your own flesh, you can understand what God is. So you look at your eye. I have an eye. God has an eye like my eye. It says, no, it's just giving you an example. Compare your eye to your nose. Why can't your nose see? No, your eye has the power of seeing. It's pretty miraculous. Your eye has the power to see. That's pretty amazing, right? So that power of seeing, right, just like your nose can't understand your eye, so your eye can't understand God's eye. But nevertheless, it's something like you're seeing the comparison between your eye power to see and your nose, right? It's a whole different sort of a power, but it's a power of perception. Well, God has that power. So a little bit you start to understand, right? So really the whole Torah is called a mashal. The whole Torah is called a parable, an example for understanding God. Understanding God. It's all just examples. Even though the Torah is given, there is a person called Abraham and there is a person called Isaac, but this is also showing on God's essence, as we will talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. Tomorrow. In any case, what the whole point of this business is, double point. First of all, to get us a little bit of a glimpse of what's going to be when Moshiach comes. That we're going to be really interested in feeling God. Just like now people are interested in money, they're interested in power, they're interested in pleasure. People will really be interested in feeling their Creator, in expressing all of the potential that the Creator has put into us. That we'll feel, we'll feel an obligation to the Creator to use every power that He gave us. the power of joy, the power of understanding, the power of love. Because we'll feel that we owe it to the Creator, so we'll feel the Creator. So now the Rebbe is just trying to give us a little bit of an example of what it is exactly that we're serving. The God that's creating us, and that He's concealed Himself 1,000,000 times so that we don't feel it. But on the one hand, He's infinitely close to us. And when we feel this, we feel a tremendous love, a tremendous awe of God. Anyway, He's trying to instill in us a little bit of this feeling of awe and what the Mashiach will. So there's two things. Number one, to have a little glimpse of why we have to have Mashiach, because the world will be so good and so wonderful. And number two, to inspire us when we pray and when we live now, to know who's enlivening us, who's the boss, whose world it is, and how infinitely good God is, and we can trust Him. As we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. Here we go. Let's do the and now, did I do right now? Okay, we'll stop the record.